or if you have a story you want to share or something you want to share with the group, feel comfortable doing that. So the name of the presentation for this afternoon is Use of Self as an Instrument of Change in the Mentoring Relationship. So we're going to talk a little bit about the kids and some things you should know about them, but a lot of this is going to really be about you and how you use yourselves in this process. So we'll start with the process for diversity learning. I'll ask that you use active listening and be open to the learning, respect others' time when they're speaking, and share the airtime. Share your experiences and appreciate the experiences of other people. Don't be afraid to respectfully challenge one another. And don't be afraid to challenge me as well. You know, yesterday we had a lot of that, and I think that just adds to the richness of the discussion. So I'm open to divergent viewpoints as well, because we know that intelligent minds will disagree. Okay? So this is a list of what we're going to cover today. I'm not going to read this list. You can see it for yourselves. There's a lot of stuff here, and we only have an hour and a half. But I guarantee you we will touch on all of it. Not necessarily in this order. There's a lot of overlap, but we will touch on all of it. So I want to start actually by getting your voices in the room. And I am not as tech savvy as Molly, so we're going to do this the old-fashioned way. And I'm just going to ask you to yell out the answers, okay? So first question, what percentage of people around the world live on less than $750 a year? Is it A, B, C, or D? C, about 50%. How many people live in poverty according to the U.S. Census Bureau? C? You are correct. And then how many people are there in the United States? About 320 million, I think, something like that. What percentage of the U.S. budget goes toward welfare and Social Security? So is it 20% to welfare and 1% to Social Security, less than 1% to welfare and 20% to Social Security, or is it 20% to both? If you said B, you are correct. Less than 1% of the budget actually goes to welfare. And then people living alone now outnumber married couple households with children. True or false? True, that is true. That was an easy one. What about percentage of children living with one parent globally? D? It's actually C. So globally, it's C. In the United States, of course, we know it's much higher. And in the African American community in the United States, it's even higher than the American average. And the majority of poor children in the U.S. live in urban areas, suburban areas, or rural areas. It is C. So often, we're more aware of urban poverty because we see urban poverty more often. The TV station is right down the street from the urban poverty, so they can set up the camera and you can look at it. But rural poverty is real, and you don't have to really travel that far out of any major city to find it. I spent some time down in northern Alabama a few years ago doing some research, and I was shocked at some of the conditions that I saw. There were actually people living with dirt floors and still using outhouses. So rural poverty is real. And then are black-on-black crime rates higher than, equal to, or less than white-on-white crime rates?
Equal.
They are virtually equal. So I know all of you have heard about black-on-black crime through the media, but how many people have heard the term white-on-white crime used? You don't hear that very often. But the same phenomenon is happening with both groups. People, unfortunately, tend to live in homogenous communities, and they commit crimes against the people that are around them. And then which group has the highest number of people living in poverty in the U.S.? It is C, because there are more white people in the country, right? So the rates of poverty for whites are lower. The percentages are lower, but the numbers are actually higher. And actually, I just want to point out a discrepancy in your book. Your book has an aggregated number that includes white Hispanics as well. So this is the actual correct statistic. So there are about 18,000 whites, about 12,000 Hispanics, 10,000 blacks, not thousand, million, these are millions, and then 2.1 million Asians, But as you can see, blacks have the highest percentage of poverty, and so do brown people. So they're overrepresented in the poverty ranks, where white people, based on their numbers in society, are underrepresented. And this is where the poverty actually exists. So the darker the blue, the higher the rate of poverty. And if you look at Ohio, we're about in the middle there. We're between 20 and 25%. That's pretty high if you think about that. And then which of the following variables mostly predicts how high a student will score on their SAT? Is it where they live, their family income, parents' educational attainment, or their race? Which one is it? Family income. Money buys resources. And then what percentage of U.S. families now fit the profile of working father, stay-at-home mom, and 2 or more kids? This one's pretty easy, right? It is about 10%. So think about this. How we define an American family has really changed over time. I was talking to some of the mentors yesterday, and they were talking about having several children who had 10, 11, 12 brothers and sisters because of the parents having different children with different people, you know, over time. It was really interesting dynamic, which I hadn't considered. So who family consists of is very different today. It could be aunts, uncles, grandparents. It's very interesting. And then what percentage of Americans are over 65 years old? Actually A, right? So why do we think that this percentage is much higher than that? Because of your age? Okay. Baby boomers, right. We're constantly hearing about the baby boomers retiring. We're talking about Social Security and Medicare and the impact of all of that. And it is significant. The reason this number is important is because this is the first time in history it's ever been that high. That's about 1 in 6 people. There are actually more millennials now than there are baby boomers. And then during the next decade, go back, what projected percentage of American children will be Black, Hispanic, or Asian? So you know it's between A or D. I gave you a little hint there. It is D. It's about 53%. So a little bit about the racial demographics by age. So for people who are 85 years and older, the ratio of whites to people of color is about 10 to 1. But as you kind of move down in age, that ratio changes drastically. And by the time you get to 10-year-olds, the ratio of white people in the country is about 1 to 1. And once you get to kids who are 3 or 4 and younger, there are actually more babies of color being born in the country today. So over time, we have had an enormous demographic shift. And it's just important to know that while diversity brings lots of positive benefits, it creates communication challenges. It really does create challenges. So you have to be deliberate, and you need to have skill in this area. Because I can tell you that these young people are going to grow up in a very different world than their parents and grandparents. And we also have globalization to contend with. We're going to be dealing with a lot more diversity. So the U.S. is projected to have no racial or ethnic group as its majority within the coming decades. We're going to have several different minority groups. And hopefully we'll get to some point where we're not even looking at this, because we know that really race is a social construct. It's a political construct. It's real because it's social and political, but it's not really biologically real in the way that we've been sort of taught to look at it. So how many of you got all those answers correct? We had a person yesterday who got them all. Anybody get all of them? No? Okay. And then were any of you surprised by some of these answers? Yes. Yeah. Why do you think I had you participate in this exercise? Why did I ask you those questions?
Awareness.
Say louder?
Awareness.
Awareness? That's one of the reasons. Why else? Change? I heard that. That's true too. Yes.
Understanding our audience.
All of those things are true. But the main reason I asked you those questions was because I was hoping that you would not get them all right. The truth is we walk around with a lot of information and we just assume that it is correct, and much of it is incorrect. So we have perceptions, and those perceptions are not always accurate. And one of the ways that we become culturally competent is that we learn that we don't know. It's that you know that you don't know. And you know that you have to ask questions. You have to be inquisitive. You have to gain more knowledge. Okay? First step in becoming more culturally intelligent is knowing that we don't know. And there's so much more to learn. So it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. Excuse me. And I tend to like to spend a little bit of time talking about change because people who don't like change usually have difficulty with diversity. Diversity and change go hand in hand. You know, change means having to adapt. It means having to be flexible. It means having to think about things differently. It means thinking about or doing something different. I mean, diversity just means difference. So it's important to know that if you're going to grow, you're going to need to be able to change. You cannot grow without changing. So actually, I'd like for everybody to just stand up for a minute. So there's nothing permanent except change. Now, all I want you to do, I'm just asking you to stand up, and I'd just like for you to wiggle around a little bit. Just move. Move yourselves. I know it's weird. I know it looks strange and awkward. You know, but I don't want you to be so stiff and rigid. You know, you need to be flexible if you're going to be diversity competent, right? And you're dealing with what? 8th graders, right? So loosen up. Get comfortable. You know, be comfortable having conversations about this stuff. Be comfortable sharing your stories. You know, I just want you to feel your body and be good with it. Okay? All right, so let's just do this thing. Okay, sit yourselves down. Thank you for doing that with me. You know, this tree is able to survive, this beautiful tree. I love images, as you can see, because it can flex and bend. It's able to adapt to its environment. So what cannot bend does what? Breaks, right. And what cannot change eventually becomes obsolete. Okay, change is really important and a powerful concept in diversity and inclusion. Now, there are several dimensions of change, and I really like this. This one focuses on the tactical dimensions and the emotional dimensions. So the words in the boxes, or the activities in the boxes, are the tactical. When you deal with change, you engage first, then you sort of practice it, you're involved in it, and you reflect on the change. And as you do that, you can approach it with excitement, or you can approach it with fear. You can approach it with courage, or you can approach it with frustration. Or you can focus on being curious about what's going on, or you can kind of be steeped in judgment. So the emotion that you choose to use as you engage with change is really up to you. You make the choice. So as we go through the program this afternoon, I'd like for you to consider and think about what your purpose is for being here. Why are you participating in this work? If you haven't thought about it, I'd like for you to be deliberate about considering that. You know, what are you hoping to give to these kids as you work with them? I'm sure there's some things that you want to share. That's why you're doing this. And then also, what are you hoping to gain? Because you should be getting something out of this process as well. This is a symbiotic relationship. It's not one-sided. It's not a one-way thing. And then how are you hoping to grow? So we know that you're here because you want to help them to grow and make some decisions. But how are you hoping to grow in this process as well? So if you haven't thought about that, I'd like for you to take some time to think about that and consider it. Now, a word of caution. So intellectual understanding doesn't always translate directly and immediately into skill. So I'm going to share some things today with you, and hopefully your knowledge level will be increased around the subject matter. But skill takes practice, and skill takes time, right? So me telling you about something doesn't mean that you're going to be able to immediately always integrate it. And just to give you an example, it's sort of like riding a bike. So I could talk to you about the physics of bike riding. I could talk to you about the velocity and the speed, and I could use math to describe it to you. But you're not really going to get it until you get on that bike, right? And then once you get on the bike, you're going to fall off a few times before you actually get it. So just know, this was a process, a real process. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes practice, and you're going to make mistakes. Be prepared for that. There's really no such thing as cultural competence. Really, all you can do is gain cultural intelligence. Because we all make mistakes, and believe me, you already have, you may not know it. And then other people will make mistakes too. So be willing to forgive them when they make them, because you're going to make them and want the same forgiveness. So this is the multiple layers of diversity model. Raise your hand if you've seen this before. Anybody in the room seen this? Okay, good. We have a few people who've seen this. So diversity is any dimension that can be used to categorize people. It's all the ways that we use to do that. And each category presents an opportunity to include people or to exclude them. And so all of these aspects really need to be strategically managed so that we are not unintentionally marginalizing people or groups. Because we can do that if we're not paying attention to what's in the environment. And know that people are not one-dimensional. So there's intersectionality with this as well. That green layer are what we call your internal dimensions of difference. So that would be your age, your race, your gender, sexual orientation, physical ability or disability, and ethnicity. As you move out on this concentric circle model, then you have your external dimensions of difference. So that includes things like your educational background, maybe some personal habits, income level, and so forth. And then there's the organizational dimension on the outer ring. So for organization, for your purposes, your ventures, that would be your category. And students, would be their category. At the center of this is your personality. Your individuality makes you unique as well. So people have idiosyncratic tendencies. You do. Your students will also. And we're quirky, so you got to learn how to work with all of that. Now, most of us tend to surround ourselves with people like ourselves. Sameness or similarity is really, really attractive to us. We are drawn to people who are like us. So I want you to think about your environment, and sameness is powerful because it's affirming, it's validating, it makes us feel good. And I want you to think about who's in your environment. Oh, sorry. So think about your neighbors to the right, to the left of you, and what they look like. Maybe your neighbor across the street, or behind you. Think about the friends that you have and the people that you socialize with and what they look like. Maybe where you shop or where you get your health care. I just want you to think about your world and who you're surrounded by. And if you're not seeing much diversity there, challenge yourself to reach out outside of that comfort zone and meet somebody new. Develop a new relationship. You'd be surprised how quickly you'll find that you can find commonality and how it really expands your world. So how often do you consciously seek out somebody who's likely to have an opposing viewpoint when you're trying to problem solve? How many usually try to find somebody with a different thought process when they're trying to make a decision? Raise your hand if you look for diversity in that. Okay, young lady in the jean jacket back there.
Yes.
Why do you do that?
I like to kind of compensate for what I may not understand or what I may not know.
Okay.
So I like someone to kind of give me the scope of things that I may not have thought about.
So you're looking for a different perspective to consider. Now, who usually tries to find somebody who thinks like them when they want a decision made? Okay, right here. Why do you do that?
Because it's easier.
Yeah, it is easy. It's comfortable too, right? Feels very validating to kind of be in that echo chamber and we're all thinking alike and looking alike and communication flows really easily. The problem with that approach all the time is, even though it's comforting, it doesn't allow for growth. It's when you have a different perspective to consider is when you have the opportunity for growth. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to agree with that perspective or change your thinking, but it gives you an option. It's something else, it's something new to consider. Yes?
Doesn't it depend on what type of decision you're trying to get right though?
Well, give me a scenario.
I don't know, if I'm trying to get my
children to take a bath, I don't really want another decision maker on the reason why they should take one. But if I'm trying to get them to decide on what institution of higher ed they should go to, I want their involvement, so I do want them, and I want different thinking in that, not just my thinking as a parent.
Well, I think the bath scenario is not really a decision, you know?
Well, my kids, I have boys, they think it is.
I believe you. I believe that to be true. But you know, I mean, if you really think about decision making, right? Not stuff like that, because I mean, you control that completely. The things where you really want to question, you know, what should I do in this situation? So it's like I said, it's very comforting to listen to someone who's likely to say, yeah, you know, who thinks like you and who's going to have a very similar outlook. But again, growth happens when you can talk to people who don't think like you. I can tell you, my circle of friends is extremely diverse, and we don't think alike at all. But I find that really stimulating because they bring so much richness to me. They bring so much, you know, so many new options to me. It really expands my own thought process. So I like being pushed like that. And then we have style and cultural differences, and this often gets in the way of us being able to form strong relationships as well. We sometimes include and exclude based on this. So who in the room is a really direct communicator? Okay, right here in the hat. What does it feel like when you're trying to communicate with somebody who is indirect as a direct communicator? Very challenging, right? What's challenging about it? Be more specific. Give me some words, some details.
Because I'm a direct communicator, I feel in some scenarios that it's time constraints, like a waste of time, it's frustrating. You're kind of having to be patient, waiting for them to go a very long way around the way to get to,
Yeah.
to a certain point. It's like, okay, next.
Yeah, so that could be a point of contention, right? Now what about who's a more indirect communicator in the room? Yes. So what is it like for you when you're trying to communicate with someone who's really direct?
It's more like slow your roll.
Okay.
Through. Let's talk about it. Let's make sure that we're getting the conclusion that we want to get to.
Yeah, so they're just different styles, but often we judge each other based on those different styles, and we start adding all kinds of values that really don't have anything to do with the styles, right? It can get in the way. I can tell you that I'm a very direct communicator also, and I work with someone who's very indirect. And so the way that we used our diversity or leveraged our diversity is that when I needed someone to help me to maybe tone something down, she was great at that. And I would go to her and she would counsel me on how to do that. And then when she needed to make something more powerful or make a message stronger, she would come to me for that. And in that way, we strengthened our team. Do you know what I'm saying? Because we could cover for each other. That's really what leveraging diversity is about. It's finding positive ways to use those differences instead of letting them be the source of negative conflict. Make sense? Okay. So I won't go through this whole list, but you're going to have students who are direct and indirect. And how are you going to accommodate those differences? So if you're more direct, you're going to be drawn to students who are like you. If you're more indirect, you're going to be drawn to those students, right? And this whole list of things.
I have a question.
Sure.
One of the things that I do, particularly on project teams in the workplace, is that I introduce, when a project is beginning, I introduce my personality style to the group.
Yeah.
And encourage them to do the same, so that we would have patience with each other as we go through the process. And I would think students could be something similar to that.
You absolutely could do that.
Understand, where everybody is, because now you're not impatient with the indirect communicator, and that indirect communicator is not impatient with the direct communicator as well, because they know at the beginning what type of personality we're dealing with.
So I love the idea of putting that on the table so you can work with it. The only thing that I would add to that is that you describe then what that means, right? Because we can label things, but then what does that actually mean? So make sure the kids kind of know that it means that, this is my preferred way of communicating. This is yours. So they're real specific about understanding what it is, right? Because we can make assumptions and they might not really know. Yeah.
Can you describe what indirect communication is?
I think you did a good job with it earlier. People who kind of don't put it out there just straight out. Sometimes they take their time. They kind of go around, are softer in their tone. Sometimes, I'm trying to think of language. This is difficult, right? Not necessarily wanting to make strong statements, feeling like they need to temper what they're going to say. So taking the time to choose the correct words. Actually, we have an indirect communicator here. Well, how would you describe that?
That's
It's harder for me because that's not my natural style, right?
That's exactly what it is. I do training and development.
Okay.
So we tie kind of our HR functions with communication as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when I send out like an email for a training, it's never, this is what the training is, this is what time you have to be there, basically show up. It's never that direct. I have to really be careful in the way that I frame things, especially if it's something that is performance related. So I really kind of have to soften that message so that it's not taken the wrong way.
Okay. Make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you. So inclusion is about behavior. It's about how we interact and engage, and it really deals with the dynamics of acceptance and rejection. You know, who are we readily accepting? And again, people with social styles that are like ours, we're going to be more automatically develop relationships with faster. You know, and then who are we really not paying attention to? So the ultimate goal is to try to foster the type of inclusive environment that engages students however they happen to be packaged. And when you're in an inclusive environment, these kinds of things are going on. So you've got a shared sense of purpose amongst the group members, trust and respect are high, and trust is really important. You know, without trust, you can't really establish a base of, you can't be relational, really, not in an authentic way without trust, right? A sense of belonging, connectedness, equity. People feel like they have equal access to opportunity, common commitment, and you will see people really engaging in a culturally intelligent way, making deliberate efforts to do that. So when we don't see and acknowledge students, we make them invisible. And until we can make the invisible visible, we can't really capitalize on all the potential that is in the environment. And you have to really understand exclusion in order to be inclusive. So, barriers to inclusion. Exclusion is the first barrier to inclusion, right? And so we need to understand more dynamics around that. All men are created equal. When this was written, about what percentage of the population did this actually apply to? Say it louder? About 10%, right? And that included who? Who was in that 10%?
White people.
White, wealthy landowners. Okay, it wasn't even the majority of white men. A small minority of white men. So, you know, these are idealistic words, but they were really exclusive because they only applied to a very small section of the population when they were written. So the country is actually founded on exclusion, not inclusion. Even though we tend to say we value inclusion, sometimes our behavior and our stated values don't necessarily get demonstrated in the ways that we think. There are a lot of inconsistencies and paradoxes. So just to give you an example. If you think about what it means to be successful in America, everything in this country is based on exclusion. We want to live in exclusive neighborhoods. We want to send our kids to exclusive schools and universities. We want to drive exclusive cars. We want to buy exclusive clothes. We want to have exclusive jewelry. I mean, it's all about exclusion. That's what success means in our environment. So we say we value inclusion, but success really equals exclusion. Feel a little cognitive dissonance there? We'll talk a little more about that too. So this is how we've historically excluded people. Through employment, land ownership, housing, education, healthcare, nourishment, social capital, political participation. Lots of exclusion taking place. Then and now, unfortunately. And when you are a part of that excluded group, which some of your students are, this is what this feels like. So your kids, the kids you're working with might be carrying some of this. Mental agony, depression. It might be showing up as hostility, anxiety, humiliation, and shame. Poverty makes people feel ashamed. We treat people who are poor in this country as if they're trash and they don't matter. That's real. Powerlessness, voicelessness. So these are some of the things that you might be seeing. And then again, as I mentioned before, broken trust is really important. It's important not to break trust, right? Broken trust really has an impact, and I would just suggest that you try to make sure that you're creating a safe environment so that students can be brave enough and courageous enough to really tell you what they think. And know that you can't really weight it to conflict, and conflict is not negative. In our world, we tend to see conflict as something negative. But really, conflict is an opportunity for growth as well, if it's productive conflict. And so, students aren't going to feel heard if they have opinions that are different than yours and they're afraid to share them. So trust then creates the foundation for them to do that. And that way, you kind of know what's in their heads and you can help them work through it. But if I'm afraid to tell you what I'm really thinking because it's different than what you're thinking, then you can't really help me through it because you don't really know where I'm at. Does that make sense? I know I kind of went around in an indirect way on that. I hope that makes sense. So we need to create psychological safety for kids in your groups. You hold the power in determining who gets attention and who doesn't. So I want you to think about that. The culture within a group can be a source of comfort and belonging for some, the in-group members, and discomfort and oppression for others. Those are the out-group members. And know that, again, kids with social skills are going to get more of your attention. Kids who have a style that is like yours will get more of your attention. And then kids who are more attractive, frankly, will get more of your attention. You know, but what are you going to do with that kid who is that's not necessarily that attractive, hasn't combed his hair in a week, doesn't have a style like yours, and smells like urine or 8th grade funk? What are you going to do with that kid? Yeah.
How do you handle the kids that don't want any part of it? Like, you really try to give them attention? Because that happened in the first session where two boy and a girl, and they just both weren't engaged at all and didn't want to be meeting. So it was like only a point where you can go to where you're like tapped to somebody to pull the butt. That was a challenge.
So what did you do?
I mean, I just kept going back to them, asking them, and then, like, the one eventually started to sort of open up, but I asked her, like, 10 different questions, and I was trying to pull from different perspectives too, like, kind of putting myself in her shoes.
Yeah. That was good. That was a very good first step.
But, yeah, like I said, I mean, I know it was only the first session, I'm hoping it gets better, but she would just sit there and, like, shake her head, like, she didn't want me to talk to her, so.
Is there opportunities to talk to kids by themselves at all? Like one-on-one?
Well, our class had 2 mentors, so it's me and one other person, and it's 30 kids, so there's really not a ton of time to be able to, like,
To break some. Anybody else have that challenge or have ideas about that? Yes.
The other mentor, she had the girl who was very reticent and didn't want to participate. You know, she said, okay, but you asked her to do, like, help her with passing out things or something, or collecting things, or put this over here.
So kept her busy and engaged in other ways.
And it gave her an opportunity to, that's good, and da-da-da, and just, doing that I thought was real smart.
Or maybe having students who are reluctant to talk, maybe write things instead. I don't know, they might be more comfortable communicating in that way. I don't know. This is going to require creativity, and know that I don't have all the answers either. This is why, I want to use the diversity and the insight that is in the room. Because I'm sure you're not going to be the only person with that challenge, yeah.
And some people are off and they sprint right away and they'll give you everything. And then we also don't know what's going on in their lives.
Absolutely.
So it could be you could have a bad day with one of those kids, or he's just not going to open up to the 6th or 7th week and all of a sudden he takes off, or they may never. And it's sometimes too hard for us to analyze because we don't have enough time with them.
So you just do what you can, just the best that
Right.
you can in the situation. I would just suggest that just try to be thoughtful, yeah.
Just to say, I had the same situation last year, and didn't force her. She didn't like, okay, that's okay, you don't have to participate. So, but eventually she did warm up a couple sessions in, but I didn't believe in pushing her. Because you don't know what's going on at home. You just don't know. So, but she was a totally different student after the few sessions.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was asking her about, like, her interests. I wasn't even necessarily saying like, what do you like to do in school? What's your favorite music? Like just trying to like talk about things that we could have in common that, you know, she might enjoy talking about, but no, those are good.
Keep the faith. Yes.
Sometimes their kids would rather talk to another kid.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes we'll have them like we'll pose a question or and instead of, you know, talking in your table, turn and talk to your partner and then, you know, give them 30 seconds, you know, bring them back and say, okay, now tell me what your partner said.
Ah, okay. That's another way to maybe try to engage. And then I saw a hand up over here. Yeah.
I'm just gonna say, we gotta remember that their hormones are changing and they're going through all of that. So I've had kids be super active in the first part of the session, and then the second part, their heads are on the desk. So
Yeah.
it can change from not only session to session, from like minute to minute.
Yeah, because remember they're 8th graders. Remember how you were, think about back to your 8th grade year. I know I was a mess in 8th grade. And I'm still a mess, but not quite as bad. You know what I'm saying? Think about that. Think about what it was like. We didn't have it all together in 8th grade. And also remember that their brains haven't even completely formed yet. Really. Yeah.
I think that the less you try to force somebody to talk, the less, you know, they're not gonna talk.
Yeah, because when we push, what happens?
Yeah, they pull
They
back
resist.
hard.
Exactly. Yeah.
So one of my greatest go-tos is smiling a lot.
Yeah.
Smile
Yeah.
at them a lot.
Yeah, because you know what? Emotional attention is powerful. Yeah, that could be useful. Okay, last one, then we have to move on. Okay, here. Go ahead. You go first.
Well, maybe you should go to the next one, because I have a question.
Okay, well, we'll come to you first then.
I just had a comment to add to the
Yeah.
situation. I did a program last year similar with younger students and it got that problem.
Mhm.
And after a few weeks, I think the problem was the gentleman over at the side of the room had mentioned you don't know what's going on with them. I think it's trust, sometimes it could be trust, they just don't trust you yet.
Yeah.
So hopefully because it's the first session, doing little things that you can show that they start to learn to trust you, just small things where they can feel that you're a trustworthy mentor, hopefully, and you can think of those ways, you know, I was thinking of ways that I used last year, but might not be applicable to an 8th grader versus 2nd grader. So if you do those things with 8th graders, I think sometimes that can really help.
And we usually build trust through self-disclosure. You know, share a challenge that you had in 8th grade or that you're having now. You'd be surprised how, you know, just knowing something a little bit maybe more personal, a little bit more about you might help somebody else to find something to relate with. What was your question?
Do you have any suggestions for like trying to be inclusive when there's a language barrier?
Ooh, that's tough. Do you have anybody in the room to help with that at all?
So we had a student who only spoke Spanish, like she understands English, but she didn't speak it well.
Yeah.
And so there was
So can you use pictures, or is there a way that she can communicate physically? What, you know what I'm saying? Maybe, you know, there's a creative way to kind of get around just language.
There's an app, you can pull an app, a translator app.
There you go. That's really practical.
My son uses it for homework. Well, you have to both ways.
I don't know if the translator apps are always accurate, because like I actually do speak a little Spanish, but I feel really uncomfortable speaking it.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to like, I don't know if that was offensive for me to try, you know, in that way.
I don't know if it'd be offensive for you to try. That's a good question. So have you talked with the school or teachers? Is there someone that they can send to help with it at all? No?
I mean, I think there's another student in the class that she was speaking to, but they got too chatty, so then the teacher split them up.
Ah, okay. I can see how that could happen too, especially with 8th graders. Okay, we're going to move on, and I'm going to skip a few slides because I think that was good dialogue. And you have the slides, so you can read them. I'm going to skip this one, as a matter of fact. Now, I'm going to talk about focused attention, because this is what I'm asking you to do. Focused attention is a keen analysis of the environment at multiple levels. So I want you to pay attention to what is not being said, and to what whose voice is not in the room, and what perspective is not being represented. Not just what is there, but pay attention to what's not there as well, okay, and have an awareness of that. So a little bit about privilege. It's impossible to disengage oneself from systemic privilege because it is bestowed by category. And the category that you are, as the privileged person in this situation, is the mentor, okay? That's your category. The privileged position is not always earned. Privilege resulting from systemic bias is not about individual effort or worth. Being in a privileged position has nothing to do with individual goodness or righteousness or moral character. And there are good and bad people who both occupy privileged and unprivileged positions. So in this scenario, privilege is just about the category. And there are certain privileges you get just because of that category, not necessarily because you've worked hard to do something. So you can also look at it in some ways, not as privilege, but as advantage. And I'm actually going to skip through these next few descriptions because you guys can read these later. Okay, so if we're talking about race, and we're talking about power and privilege, what race has the power and privilege in the United States today? White. Right. What about gender? Male. Age? Who's got the power? Middle-aged, right? Sexual orientation? Heterosexual. Mental and physical ability? Healthy, able. What about body orientation and size? Tall and thin, that's right. Most CEOs in the country are tall and thin. Now, why is that a prerequisite for being a CEO? They are, though. And when we sort of create these mental schemas about what a CEO looks like, okay?
They can afford details.
Class? Upper, right, rich. Education? Advanced degrees, that's right. And then what about religion? Christian. Position. Leadership. And then what about dialect? Say that louder. Midwestern, that's right. So if you have a Midwestern dialect, that is a privilege because that is considered standard English. It's the Midwestern dialect. Now, we judge people based on dialect, and often very unconsciously. So we unconsciously give people with British accents the benefit of being intelligent or smart, just because they have a British accent. Think about that. And then sometimes when people have really deep Southern drawls, we think they're a little slow. That's real. And I have to tell you, you know, I've been doing this work for a long time, and I struggle with all this just like everybody else. So I was in a position where I was hiring, or considering hiring someone who had a really deep Southern drawl. And I was hesitant. This woman was perfect in every way for this position. But I was really hesitant about hiring her because I didn't know how the group that she was going to be working with would respond to that. And you know, it didn't sit well with me. You know, so again, self-reflection is a way that you surface your biases. And as I thought about it, I was like, you know what? There are lots of people who are working for me who have all kinds of accents. At that time, I had people from all over the world with all different kinds of accents. I was like, so why not the Southern one? And I hired her, and she was fabulous. But I was hesitant. You know, this stuff happens, and it happens to all of us. So what about hand-used?
Right.
Right-handed, exactly. So anywhere that you fit any description here is where your areas of privilege are, at least based on this list. All of us have some privileges. We have different areas of privilege. But it's important for you to know where your areas of privilege are, because there are going to be some people you work with and some kids you work with who do not have these areas of privilege. And they don't have necessarily the privileges that you have. So let me give you an example of how this works. As a person who is a heterosexual, I can talk to you about what I'm going to do this weekend with my husband very openly. I don't have to self-censor in any way. I don't have to think about that. That's a privilege. So that aspect of my identity, I can just put out there, not even have to worry, right? But everybody can't do that. There's some people who cannot do that, or who are afraid to do that there might be repercussions. I can tell you that I knew someone once who was challenged by that. This was a woman, she was in a lesbian relationship. Her spouse's name was Jane. But when she went to work, she wanted to talk with people about what was happening in her life, just like everybody else. That's what we do, we're relational. So when she would talk about what her and Jane would do, she would change Jane's name to a man's name, like John. But then she kept forgetting the name. So then it would be Jim, and then it would be George. And so people were thinking, boy, she's got a lot of different people she's dating, you know, when she was really in a monogamous relationship with a woman, and trying to self-censor. Now, she's out now, and she actually does a lot of public speaking herself, but at the time, she was really challenged by that, so that's real. So as a person who is a Christian, if I want to buy a card for someone for one of my holidays, I can walk into virtually any drugstore on any corner, anywhere in the country, and all my holidays are represented. Don't even have to think about it. That's not true for everybody who lives here and is an American citizen. It's not that easy. You know, my holidays are scheduled off. I don't have to do any special scheduling. Everything is closed. That's a privilege. And then as a person who's healthy and able, when I came down here this morning to do this presentation for you, I didn't have to think about how I was going to get here. I didn't have to think about where I was going to park and walking down here. I could just do it. That is a privilege, because there are people who have to plot out every single step of their journey before they leave the house. And I can tell you again, I'll just be transparent about my own faux pas. So I've been doing this work for a long time. I was working at the Cleveland Clinic, and I was doing some work with some folks over at Euclid Hospital. And so there was a person there who couldn't engage in the activities that I had planned because he was a paraplegic. They have a radiologist over there who's a paraplegic. And because I have the privilege of using my arms and legs, I didn't think about the fact that there might be somebody in the room who couldn't. And that's what privilege does. It takes the advantage out of your conscious awareness. And so we assume that because we can do something, or we have something, or we have certain capabilities or knowledge or access, that everyone does. And it's just not true. So you kind of get how that works? Make sense? Okay. So power dynamics in racially diverse groups is just about understanding that in racially diverse groups, you can have power imbalances. And so if the minorities in the group don't feel like their identity is being valued or validated, they're likely to not engage. So you have to be deliberate. Again, part of creating the safe space and psychological safety is letting them know that you appreciate who they are and what they're bringing. And power and perspectives not taken is about understanding that as leaders, many of you are leaders in your workspaces, and you're certainly leaders in your mentoring roles, that sometimes we're so focused on our own agendas that we forget to kind of consider the thoughts and the views of the people that we're trying to help or work with. So just make sure that you're not becoming so self-centered yourself, that you're not using yourself in a way that is productive for the student, okay? And then also know that as a leader, you don't have to have all the answers. You shouldn't be doing all the telling and the talking. You know, engage them in arriving at answers, okay? Because when you ask me what I think, that's really powerful. So culture has a heavy influence on our perceptions. It becomes the foundations for our actions and beliefs, and we rarely question the truthfulness of those beliefs. Take a look at this map. This is the map that most of you, well, probably all of us grew up looking at. This is called the Mercator map. And this map is really good for navigation, but it actually distorts the size of the continents. So the map on the right, the image on the right, is more like the Mercator map. The map on the left, or the image there, is called the Gall-Peters map. And if you look at that, the Gall-Peters map is sort of elongated. It elongates the continents, but it gives you a better picture of what the actual size of the continent, actually is. So take a look at Africa in the picture on the left, and then look at Africa in the picture on the right in terms of size. Even the map that you grew up looking at is political. Seriously. Take a look at across the Mediterranean, that red area up top. Look at the size of Europe on the Gall-Peters map versus the size of Europe on the Mercator map. There's a reason for that. And if you think about it, the truth is, Europe is not even a continent. What is the definition of a continent? A large body, landmass, right? A large landmass surrounded by a body of water. Right, Europe is not a large landmass surrounded by a body of water. It is actually the westernmost point of the Asian continent. So basically, Europeans, again, for political reasons, have separated themselves from Asia and called themselves a separate continent. Think about mentally, though, what that does in terms of power dynamics and how all of that works. Okay? And then take a look at this. So the image on the left, this is the blue marble. So sorry, let me pop this. Halls. This picture was taken from space. And when they first took the picture, it actually looked like the image on the left. It was upside down. Then they rotated the image because we're uncomfortable, we're not accustomed to looking at things in this direction. But if you think about space, there is no up or down. There's no floor or ceiling in space, right? This is just, Earth is just there, suspended in midair. Now take a look at this map. How does looking at the map from this position make you feel? How does it feel to look at this? What's going on with you? That's not a rhetorical question. I really want to know how you feel looking at this. Uncomfortable, right. Why do you think it makes you feel uncomfortable?
You're not used to it.
Yeah, you're not accustomed to it. You're not used to it. So that discomfort that you're feeling is called cognitive dissonance. That's the discomfort that you get when you try to hold two conflicting thoughts in your head at the same time. So when you have a perception and new information gets introduced that doesn't quite fit with the perception that you held, it makes you uncomfortable. And I want you to know that feeling. I want you to get familiar with it because you get the same feeling sometimes when you're interacting cross-culturally. And when that happens, I want you to pay attention to it. And then I want you to self-reflect and ask yourself, what is making me uncomfortable about this situation? What is the dynamic here that is causing me to feel discomfort? So that you can really know what's going on with you. That's a big part of cultural intelligence. It's knowing what's happening with you internally and externally as well. So this is just a definition of cognitive dissonance that you have in your book, which I've already given you. So our culture creates expectations about what's right and wrong. It influences how we see and react to things and people. And these influences are powerful and often unconscious. Anybody here ever had an opportunity to wear a burqa? No? So what do you think it would feel like to have that on? What do you think that experience would be like? Say it out loud.
Confining.
Confining. How else do you think you might feel? Odd. I thought the same thing too. I thought it would be confining. I thought it might be itchy, hot. I thought I would feel really confined. But I will tell you, I actually had the opportunity to wear one. And I was really surprised by that experience. So I put it on, and I have to tell you, it was liberating in ways that I never would have imagined. So when you have that thing on, your hair could look any kind of way, because nobody can see your hair, right? You don't have to wear makeup. You could be completely naked under there, and no one would know, right? It was, because, we're so accustomed to people looking, that, nobody's looking at you, and it was really very liberating to not be seen sometimes, So a lot of times we have perceptions about things, but when we actually engage, we have a different type of experience. All right, so we're going to do an exercise now. I'd like for everybody to stand up and find a partner, and then move around the room so you can have some space.